Hi, I'm Spiders, and if you're someone who thinks your builds may be lacking or just someone who wants to learn more about what they might be able to improve on their builds, then this video is for you. Here are 5 common mistakes that I see people make all the time. Let's get into it. Now, the first mistake that I want to get out of the way, because this is something that I see a lot of my viewers do that can really easily be avoided, is using a build that's pretty outdated. Now, generally, any build that's about 3 months or older is probably not going to be very good right now, and I'll use some examples to kind of show why. So my first example is actually my old main build that I made a showcase on about 7 months ago. Now, at the time, this was actually probably the best Gale Blade build in the game, pretty much perfect. There was almost nothing better. So at the time, this build was pretty much as good as it got for a Gale Blade build. But again, this build was made 7 months ago in December, so that is definitely not the case anymore. One reason for that is because this build went pre-shrine reinforced armor, meaning that I got 90 fortitude, 30 willpower pre-shrine, got reinforced armor, and then used the shrine of order, and you can see I have 65 fortitude post-shrine. Now, the reason this is really bad is because when you get reinforced armor, the amount of pen resistance it gives you scales with your fortitude. So when you have 90 fortitude, it gives you 40% pen resistance, but when you have 65, it gets reduced down to 20%. So the talent's effectiveness is really cut in half here, which is not good. That is something you really want to avoid. But of course, when I made this build, that didn't exist. So when I had 65 fortitude here, I'd still get the full 40% in reduction. So that's why back then I did this on this build. Another thing about this build that ended up getting nerfed was agility too. At the time, I went 65 agility pre-shrine, which was okay. But then Tap Dancer got reworked, and this ended up being pretty bad for a while. But then again, now that Air Counter has been added, 65 agility isn't too bad pre-shrine. But since I made this build before Air Counter was added, I couldn't get that talent, and that was not great. So that's kind of another thing. And one more thing that I'd like to point out is that I also went really high Gale Breath, even though I was using the Gale Hero Blade. Now back then, less talents existed, so it's kind of okay to invest more into your weapon. But now you definitely don't want to go with this high Gale Breath, and you want to stop somewhere around 80 so you can get level 5 mantras and not really go past that. Instead, now it would be a lot better to invest more into your attributes and get more talents instead. So that's definitely something I'd do now if I was changing this build. And also one more thing, Gale Blade is also not strong right now, so I probably wouldn't even go that weapon, but that's kind of up to you anyways. So I won't really talk much about that. So yeah, like I said, at the time, this build was basically perfect and this was super good. But as the months went by, a lot of the stuff in here ended up getting nerfed or new stuff was being added. So if you made this build now, this would probably not be super good and I do not recommend it. And this kind of pattern basically repeats with every build, so keep that in mind. And here I also have a more recent example. Here you can see the spear build that I made, and this was around 4 months ago, so it's a little bit more recent. Now in this video, I actually showcased 2 different builds, and this first one ended up being really gutted. Now the reason for this is because it relied on a really good synergy being Frost with Ice Eruption plus Medium Spear, which could basically confirm Ice Eruption. I probably have a clip at the start here, let me see if I can find it. So yeah, here on screen you should be seeing an example of that combo I was talking about, and this pretty much does not work at all anymore, since they made it so that when you're dazed by the Spear crit, it doesn't prevent you from rolling like you used to be able to, which is what this combo really relied on. So this is not true anymore, and that 20 Frost on this build is basically useless now. So this build has that really big imperfection about it. It says that this other build here on the right is actually not that bad, but I will say that my new main build is probably a lot better than that one, since I traded off a bit of tankiness for more agility, which is really helpful. So especially after they added Air Counter, which again didn't even exist back then 4 months ago when I made this build too. So that's another thing that didn't exist at the time that I couldn't have taken advantage of. So yeah, with that all in mind, I just want to make it clear, make sure you don't use outdated builds, since that can be a really big mistake that you're doing, especially if you're someone that gets a lot of builds from YouTubers or other people. So make sure you avoid that if possible, and generally a good rule of thumb is to not use builds over 3 months old, since if you use a build 3 months or older, there's a very high chance that it will be outdated and it will almost definitely not be perfect. 2 months old, maybe it could be outdated if you get unlucky. 1 month old, it's probably fine. So yeah, 3 months is where I draw the line. Now extending off the last mistake, another mistake that a lot of people make is not reading the update logs. In this game, every week things are changing, so by not reading the update logs, your build that you're progressing could be getting nerfed while you're not even knowing. For example, I'll go over some big things that happened this week. Now for one, obviously there's these new medium weapons, and this one actually happens to be really good. The Nocturne has some super good crits, and its stats are pretty nice too. So if you are making a medium build, it might be good to know about this, because it does have a pretty high requirement of 90 medium, which you might not be going on your build already. So by paying attention to the update logs, you can know about this weapon and change your stats accordingly, in case you want to run it. Another big thing that I'd like to know is that the mantra Ice Spikes got nerfed really hard this update. And if you're not keeping up with the meta, you might not know, but Ice Spikes was super broken before this nerf, and was one of the best cheese mantras in the game. But now after these 2 nerfs these update, this mantra got gutted really hard. So if you were planning to make a cheese build based around this, then knowing that this happened would be really important for you. And also one weapon that got nerfed really hard this update that I like to mention is the Pyre Keeper. Now as you can see here, it might not seem like a nerf initially since it also kind of got buffed in some ways. But one thing that I've heard from some top Flametron players is that these changes were actually a huge nerf, since the guard break capability of the sprinting crit was way stronger than the ground crit. So at least according to some top players that I've been seeing talk about this weapon, this was a really big nerf for this weapon, and if you're planning to go this weapon, you might want to reconsider. So if you happen to make a Please Inferno weapon build, you might want to keep this in mind. mind, and by reading the update logs, which by the way this was 4 days ago, you could save yourself a lot of time progging a bad build, or a build that isn't what you expected it to be. Now another big mistake that I see people making all the time is not having synergy on their build. Now synergy is basically when two things work really well together, and that is really important to make sure that your weapon, attunement, oath, all of that stuff works together nicely and is really strong when combined together. Now synergy can be applied to every aspect of your build, but the most important one that I want to focus on is your attunement plus your weapon type. For example, light weapon is actually not good on every build. It's really strong on something like Frostra, for example, but if you use light weapon on Gale Breath, it'll be way worse, so that's something you kind of want to avoid. Instead, on Gale Breath, you should be using a medium weapon, since having the range and also chip damage on the stronger medium weapons is really good on Gale. So Gale plus medium synergy is really good, however Gale plus light synergy is really bad. Now of course, knowing what works well together and what weapon type is good with what attunement can be kind of hard for a newer player, or someone who doesn't have a lot of experience in PvP. So as a top player on screen, you'll be having what I think are the best synergies for each attunement. Now of course this is all up for debate, but this is just what I think from my experience as a top player and from talking and seeing other top players use their attunements. So do make sure you keep that in mind, but if you follow this, I guarantee you that your builds will definitely be more optimal in the meta, so this is what I definitely recommend. Also, these aren't strict and there are exceptions to this, so make sure you keep that in mind. Now moving on to the next common mistake, you might have your stats lined up and perfect and have that all good, but something that a lot of people forget to do is actually complete min-maxing their build and get everything outside of their stats perfect. For example, here you can see all of my talents here, which are perfect by the way. I made sure to get all of this stuff exactly how I wanted it. But of course, I didn't get all this stuff first try, and I didn't get everything perfectly when I re-rolled it, just from like when you level up and all of that. I actually had to go to the Shrine of Chance, which you find at Fort Mirror by the way, and re-roll for these talents. Now a lot of people are actually too lazy to do that, which is understandable, but if you are too lazy to do that, then it will definitely hurt your build for sure, since you'll be missing out on a lot of potentially good talents that could be helping out your build a lot. So this aspect of min-maxing is really important. Besides that, there's other stuff that you'll have to do when you complete your build, such as getting good equipment. As you can see here, I have some really good equipment on right now, as well as the best enchants of course with multiplicity and viscosity and all that, so definitely another good thing that helps. And also another important thing is getting the right monsters that you want, since you might not get all of these first try either, so you could have to reroll with knowledge for this as well. But yeah, all of this stuff, farming knowledge, going to the shrines can be really annoying. So if you're too lazy, you don't have to do this, I guess. But this is something really good for making sure that your builds are perfect and exactly how you want them to be. So if you're making a build that you're planning on using for a long time, I would really recommend doing this, making sure you get all your talents, all your mantras, all your equipment perfect. But it's up to you, so just make sure you know that in case you ever care about doing that. Now, if you've done all the stuff that I mentioned so far correctly, making sure to min-max your build, get all the right stats, make sure it's up to date, but you still think that your build sucks and you can't do well with it, well, the harsh truth is that the last thing you might need to do to perfect your build is not improve your build, but improve yourself. Since putting all your pride aside, all your Deepwoken ego, you might just suck at your build especially. And you know what, that's okay, I was 700 elo too, we've all been there. But even the most hyper cheese, bomb, railgun, vision shaper build ever, even that requires at least a little bit of skill, you know, you gotta learn how to aim your bombs, you know, even just a bit. So just keep in mind that every build has at least some sort of skill curve, and you won't be able to master your build on day one. I know that's something kind of obvious, but you know, sometimes you just need a harsh reality check, and that's something you should always keep in mind. Also, Deepwoken is a game with a super high skill cap, so even if you don't have the best meta build out there, you can definitely still reach the top and be one of the best players in the game. So although having a meta build will definitely help, sometimes a lot, make sure that while improving your build, you don't forget to improve yourself as well. And you know, try and learn stuff along the way. Anyway, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and like and subscribe for more top content. See you in the next one.